When is it okay for Catholics to disobey their government or even overthrow it? So, a lot of tradcasts today. I remember I was at a traditional Catholic gathering, and we were talking about the vaccine mandates that we had a few years ago, and how it, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, it is not only permissible but even a duty of Catholics to overthrow a tyrannical government. This was opinion I once had many years ago myself. That look, we have unborn children being destroyed. We have gender ideology that contradicts basic natural law, according to Catholic teaching. At what point do we raise an army and topple the government? And I was actually in favor of this position for many years myself. But I realized, there are passages in the Bible that say, look, one of the people who will not inherit the kingdom of God are those who betray their government. One of the people who will not inherit the kingdom of God are people who assassinate civil leaders. So this got me thinking, look, if we do this and we are wrong, we die in a mortal sin, and we get shot or die in the attempt, and we're wrong, we go straight to hell because we committed a mortal sin. So I decided, I should do some research on this. If we're talking about establishing a traditional Catholic theocracy, a traditional Catholic state, which I do believe in, it needs to follow traditional Catholic religious teaching and religious law from its very conception. The very act of its establishment needs to be founded in traditional Catholic teaching. So I started doing research on this topic, about when it is possible to topple a government. So it is allowed under some circumstances, but those circumstances are incredibly limited. So let's look over what I found over the years. Okay, for starters, generally, Catholics are expected to obey their government, period. And I'll give some examples of this. So in Humanum Genus, the idea that you can simply disobey a government because you feel it's restricting your liberty, and you withdraw your consent to its actions, was condemned as a Masonic error by Pope Leo XIII. Yes, a government can restrict your conscience, strictly speaking. I'll give examples of it, which, in fact, a traditional Catholic state would have the right to do so. So, for example, in the Syllabus of Errors, it condemned the error that every man should be allowed to freely choose whichever religion that they find fit and true. That is condemned in the Syllabus of Errors. In Leo X's Exsurge Domini, paragraph, one of the errors condemned of Luther was that it was a sin against the Holy Ghost, that heretics should be burnt. This was also condemned by Leo X. So I remember chatting on Instagram with someone who said, well, we have a God-given right to follow our conscience. No, you don't, actually, under divine law. Even St. Thomas Aquinas himself, so often cited who was cited for his talk about it's a duty to resist a tyrant. According to the same author, it is within divine law to have people to be forcibly converted and compelled to convert if they had already been baptized to the Catholic faith. So Protestants, according to pre-Vatican II Catholic teaching in the Summa Theologica, are required to convert. They can be forced to convert. Now, I'm not advocating for this here now for many practical reasons. Canon law says the first law of the Church is the salvation of souls, and doing so, even if you could establish a Catholic state right now, would probably cause more harm than good, both temporally and spiritually. But it is something that, strictly speaking, is within the right of a state in Catholic teaching, or even the duty of a state within Catholic teaching, to enforce what is right. So the individual conscience in Catholic teaching is not supreme. This does not mean a government can just do whatever it wants and there's no liberty whatsoever. But the idea of liberty of conscience, as we understand it in our Western society, and that rejecting it as being tyranny, is not something that is in line with Catholic teaching. Secondly, we need to define what tyranny is in Catholic teaching. Tyranny from a pre-Vatican II Catholic teaching would be, as a government, and as far as authorization to overthrow a government goes, would be if the government actively prevents you from following the divine faith, or so if the government forbids Catholicism, or if it is making laws that are explicitly to harm the common good and without reference to that. In a democracy, secular democracy, which I admit I do not believe in, I do not praise, I'm generally certainly lean more towards authoritarianism in my belief system, this is actually a very hard argument or case to make. So especially when we have governments. Look, so for example, here in Nova Scotia, as I'm filming this, I am not allowed to walk in the woods. I'm in a park area. There's some trees around here, but I'm not in the woods as such. That has been forbidden by the government right now. That is not tyranny, because it is aimed towards the common good of preventing wildfires. The reasoning being, well, look, we got crazy people who are going to the woods setting fires on purpose, so we need to keep everyone out of the woods to make sure the crazy people don't go in. Because, look, we need to be 100% sure. We already got like 11 large wildfires in the province, and we have experiences from 2 years ago where like communities can burn down. Canada has had a case of a few years ago, even an entire city burning down. So whether you agree or disagree with that policy, it is a policy that is aimed at the common good, which is what, according to Aquinas, laws are supposed to be aimed towards. Also, it does not prevent me from following or preaching or sharing the Catholic faith. Not one bit. So my liberty is not being infringed upon in that regard, as far as the Catholic faith. Ergo, current ban is not tyranny. Secondly, another example would be during the COVID pandemic, and I'm going to get a lot of people mad at me for saying this. Certainly the mask mandates, there's nothing about social distancing in much of the world that prevents you from keeping the Catholic faith. There were shutdowns of cities during plague, when even masses were stopped, and social distancing was even practiced in the Middle Ages to prevent the spread of plague and disease. During much of COVID in Nova Scotia, where I live, the government that allow people to have large outdoor gatherings of up to 200 people. If you're a traditional Catholic in Nova Scotia, if you just have mass outside, it's no problem. There's no issue with it whatsoever. And there is no sin nothing in the faith that says you cannot wear a mask. Cannot wear a face mask because the government says so. And whether or not you think COVID is real or not, the thing is, most people where I live certainly believe COVID was real, 90%. We do have a healthcare system that is strained because of our aging population, which is majority of the population. It's not like one or two old people here and there. Ergo, for us, yes, that was justified. Now, there is certainly, in this case, that instance, possible violation of the liberty of the church, Ecclesia Libertate, which forbids the state from ordering the church around on such matters, even on such matters. And yes, that is a real concern. That being said, and I've heard more theologians speak about this, notably Father Gregory Hess, when he spoke about Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre and why he accepted the 1962 Missal, rather than an older missal, which might be more pure, is because he's considered to be the last acceptable version of the Trinity Mass issued, and that when you resist authority, you do the bare minimum required to do what you need to do. You do not generally do overkill when you resist an authority. So, is it potential government overreach? Possibly, yes, that is the case. That being said, in such an instance, you do the bare minimum what you need to do to resist, to do what you need to do. In that case, yeah, you can have mass outside. It's and you can have 200 people, multiple masses. You can hear confessions from like 6 feet or more away. With vaccination, it's a little bit more complex. I am known in track house circles as being very pro-vaccination. That being said, I do not want to deny the serious concern. This is a legitimate concern about using aborted fetuses in vaccines. Now, do I think that's the case, at least with all vaccines? No. I did choose to get vaccinated. And I would favor, and it would be a complex situation because you seem to have almost a contradiction of principles in this case. So, on the side of those who resisted the vaccine mandate, there was a legitimate question, which I think could have been answered a lot better, about how these vaccines were made as far as pro-life goes. It's MNR versus this type of vaccine. Like, I'm sorry. It's experimental technology. Yeah, it's a new vaccine. It's a new vaccine. Get over yourselves. But as far as how they are tested on the cell lines, that's far more legitimate. And it is a fair question that track-caths want answers to. And if a medicine is being made in which it would create a demand for innocent human life to be taken actively, yes, those are grounds for refusing that medicine, even if it means directly defying the state. That is the one line you do not cross. You cannot, a law which you are commanded to commit a positive sin, especially a mortal sin, can always be disobeyed, and always should be disobeyed, whether by any authority, whether ecclesiastical or civil or parental, etc. You should always go with God should be first served. We should serve God rather than men, as St. Peter said before the Sanhedrin. That being said, on the other side of it, ordering a general vaccine mandate, if there's nothing wrong with the vaccines and how they're made, would be something that would fall under the jurisdiction of government to command. It is such a mandate, especially when there's a pandemic, when everyone's safety, and because there are people who can't get vaccinated, everyone's safety needs to be protected by herd immunity. Getting herd immunity by getting sick, it has been tried before and resulted in a lot of people dying in the past. Especially there's not a lot of good, especially if healthcare systems are weak at a certain location, like where there's a lot of old people in Nova Scotia. It would, so yes, the government would have competent authority to tell people to get vaccinated in that case. Now, when seems to be a conflict, the best path to go to would be to find a pro-life vaccine. Now, early in the pandemic, there was actually guidelines issued by the albeit Vatican II Catholic Church in the United States, ranking the different types of vaccines, how they were made, as far as how pro-life friendly they were. I based my decisions off of that. It was eventually taken down because there was a lot of pressure to just take whichever vaccine you wanted in the States, and whatever you get is whatever you get was the attitude of some, and they shut it down. I was able to get a hold of it though. Based on those rankings, I chose to get vaccinated with either Pfizer or Moderna. Eventually I went with Moderna, the second best choice. My main rule of thumb was, if what I'm getting vaccinated with is causing an unborn child to die, potentially even if there's a serious concern, I'm not getting it. Based on those guidelines, Pfizer, Moderna, I went with Pfizer, Moderna, because while they were tested on cell lines from an aborted fetus, all these many years ago, it was from cell lines that were made from the 1970s. I was not even born in the 1970s. Well, that is certainly not a good thing that happened, to put it mildly. Understand, I'm using Canadian understatement here. It is not me getting vaccinated is not causing more onboard children to die if I get that vaccine. Just as if I were to spend a night if I got were invited by Donald J. Trump over to the White House, spend the night there, me staying in the White House would not make me complicit in the sin of slavery, even though the White House was built by slaves. It would not be the case. Just as me not living under a literal Nazi regime is a sin, it's just sharing in the sin and the lies that Winston Churchill told to help the Allies win the war. So that is my general rule of thumb. That's the general rule of thumb I go with. So, and also, I'm speaking with anti-vaxxers specifically in this regard. if there is an option, and this is the main thing, with the pro-life, it was a valid concern by some anti-vaxxers. It was a valid question. I don't agree with them, but refusing to believe anything, refusing to make any compromises, just undermines support to make pro-life friendly vaccines. And in fact, in here in Nova Scotia, anti-vax sentiment, especially because they're concerned with the MMR vaccines, made the government of Nova Scotia bring in those type of vaccines to our province. And those properly made vaccines that were traditionally made were made and tested in a way that caused demand for onboard children to die. So the anti-vaxxers actually made the vaccine rollout in Nova Scotia far less pro-life than it could have been. Which is why I always say, do your research first and just and listen to both sides before you make a decision. And the government simply telling you what to do is not tyranny. It is about, you have to obey divine law. And the government telling you what to do is not a violation of divine law. So the government has to actually be committing tyranny. The best case of this, or framing explicitly unjust laws that harm the common good. The best case you would have for this in North America today would be the anti-life movement and the sins against the unborn. So going forward, what do you do? What does this look like? So for starters, this is not something a private individual is allowed to do, according to Francisco Suarez. You may not simply topple a government. This is not a private individual. I'm at a government, therefore I can disobey. No. This is a serious thing. Disobeying the government for any reason is a serious sin. Under normal circumstances, and overthrowing government is something that a private individual is not allowed to do. It must be the entire society as a whole that assents to this and withdraws its consent. Individual people here and there may not do that. It has to be the collective society as a whole. This is pretty near impossible in a democratic system, which is where we get a lot of people saying, oh, the elections are stolen, elections are hacked. I'll say this, in Canada, that is a very hard case to make, especially as even Donald Trump has actually praised Canadian election security. Even American Republicans have praised how secure our elections are. It is... Honestly, honestly, if you're in a democracy, and you're saying that your elections are rigged, I would want a lot of evidence. And considering how serious the matter is, you need to listen to the counter evidence that says, you just lost. Honestly, I'm skeptical about any such claims. And this goes both for right-wingers who say that Donald Trump really won in the 2020 election. This goes for right-wingers who say that, Justin Trudeau is not legitimate Prime Minister of Canada. But it also goes, to a certain degree, for people who say that Vladimir Putin or Orban in Hungary are not legitimately having the support of their people, or that they are tyrants. I'm skeptical. And also, I want to point out that even in a non-democratic society, to rebel, you need the assent of the people. And this is in addition to the tyranny I'm mentioning. That is a hard way to gauge. How would you gauge it? You'd have to get a strong polling. You'd have to be very clinical. You'd have to worry about confirmation bias. Confirming such a thing would be incredibly difficult. To the point where I sincerely doubt there's any such government today where we could say they are not legitimate. They are not, they no longer have the support of their people. In fact, according to, as I recall, according to Rerum Novarum, and decrees against communism and masonry, the burden of proof for saying the government is voluntary tyranny is on the revolutionaries and revolution is to be approached with extreme skepticism. So if you are saying that in your country, whether you're right-wing or left-wing, both for the people who say Donald Trump had his election stolen in 2020, or Viktor Orban is a tyrant in Hungary, the burden of proof is on you to make that claim and to prove it. And your confirmation bias is probably quite good. I've seen both left-wing and right-wingers talk about this. The confirmation bias is massive. I'm sorry. I would not trust really anyone. I would personally be very skeptical of anyone making that claim, that their government's election was stolen. And even then, a dictatorship is a legitimate form of government in Catholic teaching. Most Catholic governments throughout centuries have been absolute monarchies. And indeed, many countries were converted to the faith by the order of a king in an absolute or very powerful monarchy, notably St. Vladimir the Great, who basically shoved everyone to the Dnieper River to be baptized at Spear Point. Notably Tiridates III of Armenia, who fought an entire civil war to make in order his whole country and compel them to become Christian. Notably the English kings, who basically had government council meetings and in council basically said, we're all becoming Christian now. We're all becoming Catholic now. So it does not need to be a purely democratic system. So even if you lose a purely democratic system, that doesn't mean that they no longer have the assent of the people. But it's near well impossible in a democratic system or society to prove that your election, that your government doesn't have the assent of the people. Secondly, there are rules about you need a papal dispensation. Even then, look for example, I remember reading the biographies of all the popes, and when it came to the time of James I of England, who was persecuting Catholics, it was the time of the Gunpowder Plot. The Pope of the time issued a decree to the Catholics of England telling them to obey James I. The decree of whether or not you obey or disobey a heretical or pagan civil leader, it is in the hands of the church and of the hierarchy. Notably, when it comes to this level, it's the Pope who needs to dispense from obedience. That is why St. Pius V had to issue the bull Regenerationem Excelsis, because the Catholics of England knew that they normally had to obey even a heretical queen unless the Pope gave them a dispensation from it. That is why you have all these things. That is why you have so many cases. That is why we had James I say you can't say. That is why under the time of James I of England, the Pope said, obey the king, even though yes, he's a heretical tyrant. And they had to obey. That was the decree of the Holy Church. In Una Papal Unum Sanctum, it says there are two swords that are in the hand of the church. The Templar sword is in the hand of the church. And let's not remember that even though the temporal sword can be used to overthrow civil governments that are tyrannical, it is still the church's as a whole, and I don't mean your little gathering of rosary or random bishop here and there. I mean the collective full authority of the church has to say, we dispense from this. I would mess with this, because remember the context in Unum Sanctum of the two swords is Christ saying, put your sword down. Lovely fountain here. This is the teaching of the church. So this is another burden. So in this day and age, does anyone here think that Leo XIV is going to issue them a dispensation? On the January 6th events that we saw in previous years, did Pope Francis issue a dispensation to the people to do that? Or if you believe the other side, did Joe Biden issue? Was Joe Biden issued a dispensation, if you think the otherwise? During the convoy event in Ottawa a few years ago, did Francis give them a dispensation? Does anyone here who's rebelling against their state now, wants to overthrow, have they contacted their papal nuncio and asked for dispensation? I'm saying this: if you want to overthrow your government and disobey it and overthrow their tyranny, you should contact the papal nuncio and ask for dispensation. That is, according to Francisco Suarez, a requirement for toppling a tyrannical government is a dispensation from the See of St. Peter. Now, if you're extremely isolated like the Japanese Christians, perhaps you could dispense a bit, perhaps you could have a lower level, or a crisis, or there's a crisis in the church. With the crisis of the church, maybe it could be someone else, but it would need to be representative. It would need to be more than just one bishop. Again, even saying that anyone other than the See of St. Peter, under extreme circumstances, could dispense with, to give the dispensation, is itself just a theory on my part. But it is something that needs to be followed. It would need to be someone who has the jurisdictional affairs over the entire country, over the entire situation, in some fashion. So the fact that they did not just simply apply to the Archbishop to the remaining Catholic hierarchy of England, and then they had to appeal to Rome for that, makes me think it would need to have some sort of international jurisdiction. Maybe you could contact the SSPX District Superior General and ask for it, maybe. At least the District Superior of the SSPX. I would not, if you have a small congregation, I'm sorry. I would not be worthwhile. And even then, keep in mind, even that dispensation is still operating on it's predicated upon the previous conditions being met. So even with a papal dispensation, you need the consent of the whole country as well. And there needs to be a tyranny where either the faith is being opposed or they're objectively making laws contrary to the common good. And by common good, I don't mean everything that inconveniences you. It means like not a single, they're taxing everyone to death and not a single thing is being given to the poor people. And there are no services at all. And like, it's still third world and the king. And then even then, you need dispensation and everything else. It's like, it has to be extreme. I would honestly, for temporal tyranny, I would not, in the Western world, I would not take such a claim seriously. And I do watch news. I do hear claims about how bad Carney is, how bad Trump is, how bad Biden was, etc., etc. I'm sorry. The level that we're talking of tyranny, it has to be an intentional ignoring of the common good. And you not liking or understanding the rules does not qualify. So even assuming you have a legitimate case of tyranny, which again you need to watch for, or the church is being persecuted and there's no other option but to basically try to overthrow the government, then assuming you get said dispensation, there are still rules. There are still a number of rules you need to follow. For starters, then the laws of just war apply. What you do cannot cause more harm than just leaving the government in power. And there's so many Karens who are just so delusional who think the worst thing in the world is them having to take their medicine. Or them going for a walk in the woods. That's tyranny. You know what's worse? A violent revolution and uprising in your country where people are dying. Literally dying. Bloodless clues are near well impossible. This is, and furthermore, you need to have something to show that what replaces it is better. And this is one of the reasons why I don't think we have a triad state today. Most traditional Catholics I've met do not know basic Catholic social teaching. Or care. Remember when I was in a group, I said, okay, we're all reading Rerum Novarum, and someone said to someone, when I said, you need to read this, and an old woman group was coming, another old woman said, oh, it's okay, you don't need to actually agree with Rerum Novarum. I flat out said, yes, you do. That is Catholic teaching. If that's not your ideology, then I'm sorry. Nitpicking the parts of Catholic teaching that you want to follow because it suits you, whether it be because it's obey the government whenever you want, or disobey the government whenever you want, or obey no matter what. And there are people on both sides of that who could selectively quote cite Catholic teaching in that regard. You need to take this seriously. This is your soul and the souls of others. And Anger of man doth not work the justice of God, the Bible is what the Bible says. I'm sorry, but most track casts do not even know what the church teaches or what framing a Catholic state would look like. They would know we don't have gender ideology and abortion. Okay, great. What else? You do not running a government is a serious business. It would need to be a Catholic state because then you get rid of the sin of abortion and gender ideology, but there might be a whole other bunch of sins that you're bringing in instead. It needs to be a better improvement. And this is why I think God is allowing us to have woke lords. I'll say this about the woke lords. They do believe in enforcing what they think is right. They're wrong on many things, but they do enforce it. And most traditional Catholics, why a Catholic state would absolutely be way better, do not know Catholic teaching or ideology. We go after Ayn Rand, or Trump is Catholic social teaching now. Or if you're leftist, oh, Carney or Trudeau or the Liberal Party is Catholic social teaching. No, it's something different that both sides are ignoring. Something that both sides are ignoring. So if you hate the tyranny of the government, or want a Catholic state, or want to overthrow it, my first question is actually do your research into what this would look like. Most of you who are watching this are ignorant on the matter. I'm sorry. And as you can gather, I do not think that this is the way forward, having a revolution. I think that the way forward for us is Catholic faithful tradition. Study Catholic social teaching, read Mortalem Animus, read the Simplicissimus Veris, embrace Catholic doctrine on and having freedom and not having freedom. Both. Some things will be more free, some things will be less. Realizing the government, yes, can tell people to act against their conscience in some cases. Realizing that, yes, sometimes we need to listen to evidence. It would take a lot of critical thinking skills and a lot of research to even be prepared. Get started. And once you've learned, get involved in government somehow. And do I recommend any political party? I recommend them all. There are aspects in Democrats and Republicans in the States. There are aspects of the Conservatives and Liberals and NDP that have Catholic teaching but also have compromises. It's all of them. And it's about bringing Catholic teaching to all these parties and making them all aligned to Catholic teaching their own way. And that is the best way forward in a democratic society, in my opinion, to promote a traditional Catholic state. Bit by bit, slowly by slowly. That is how it would happen in Rome. That is how the leadership converted and slowly over time brought things in line with the teachings of the church. May God bless. Have a great day. Check on SSPX Church. Please do not try to overthrow your government. Please do your research before you do anything or say anything. Get vaccinated with a pro-life vaccine. Please stay out of the woods. If there's wildfire season, the government says stay out. That is acting in the common good. God bless. Study Catholic tradition and become a traditional Catholic. God bless.